With the way people are reacting to the college football playoff rankings right now, talking about how this team would be favored over this team right now, these SEC teams would crush BYU, Indiana, or SMU if they played them on a neutral site field, and the talks of conferences lowering their amount of conference games, I think it takes away from some of the amazing things we have actually watched go down this season that proves you can't assume how things are going to go based on how they look on paper. This season has been extremely chaotic week in and week out. I think the one lesson we should have learned so far this season is the fact that you can't assume anything in college football this year. With the 12-team college football playoff rankings being under an extreme microscope before we have even seen any games played under the system, and people calling out the committee before the final rankings come out, I felt like we all need to take a collective deep breath and slow our rolls a bit. Is the 12-team playoff system broken already? Does it spell disaster for the future of college football? Let's talk about that. But before we get into that, if you enjoy college football content like this, make sure to leave a like and subscribe. Also, let me know how you would grade the committee's first two rankings with the letter grade in the comment section below. Heading into this season, BYU was projected to finish 14th in the Big 12 and were projected to win 4.8 games according to ESPN's FBI ratings. Indiana was projected to finish 17th in the Big 10 and projected to win 5.3 games based on those same ratings, while SMU was projected to finish 4th in the ACC and win about 8 games. None of these three teams on paper were expected to be competing for the college football playoff spot, aside from maybe SMU, who was viewed as a dark horse in the ACC. On the other hand, Florida State was projected to win the ACC, while Utah or Oklahoma State were projected to win the Big 12 depending on what you looked at. On paper, BYU and Indiana were not supposed to be good teams, while Florida State, Utah, and Oklahoma State were supposed to be great teams. The reality of the situation is that you can't rely on what betting sites, computer projections, or whatever metric you want to use to look at things on paper. We live in a world where people view things as black and white, but when it comes to college football, things like to live in the gray. Notre Dame was 28-point favorites over Northern Illinois, and they lost at home to them. On paper, Notre Dame should have crushed NIU and should be undefeated at this point. On paper, Notre Dame versus Florida State should have been one of the premier matchups of last week. Instead, it was a game that featured a team with one win versus a Notre Dame team that is fighting for the college football playoffs. There's a narrative going around right now from certain SEC media members that Georgia deserves to be in the college football playoffs, even if they have 3 losses because they are the better team than Indiana and BYU by a long shot. Again, on paper. This Georgia team is not playing well right now. They struggled against a 3-6 Kentucky team. They lost to Alabama, survived against Florida, who was playing with their third-string quarterback, who was a walk-on this past spring, was originally playing at an Ivy League school, and just got destroyed by Ole Miss. While the score was 28-10 to Ole Miss, when you actually go back and watch that game, Ole Miss dominated Georgia for most of the game, but just couldn't convert their drives to touchdowns, being held to a few field goals throughout that, and even with their freshman backup quarterback coming in when Jackson Dart went down with an injury. From what I watched, that game should have been 42-7 or 42-10 if Ole Miss had a decent red zone offense this year, which statistically they do not. On paper, Georgia should be dominating everyone this year, returning their quarterback, who was supposed to be the first overall pick in the 2025 NFL Draft according to the experts. A strong run game and a dominant defense. But while it looked like that on paper, the reality of the situation is they have not gotten everything together this year and are struggling during a key part of the season. Now, that's not to say they can't get it together and they may bounce back, run the table looking like a completely different team than they looked over the past few weeks if they play up to their potential. That is also not supposed to be a point to knock on Georgia either, because I think they are one of the best teams in the nation when they decide to show up to play. But if we want the regular season to matter like so many want to talk about with the fear of the 12-team playoff, we can't talk about ranking teams based on potential. While your record does not say who you are or how good you are, if we want regular season games to matter, you need to win the games on your schedule. South Carolina is a team that has played extremely well all year, and if 1 or 2 plays go their way, they are sitting with 1 or 2 losses instead of 3 losses with the way the LSU and Alabama games went for them. With that same argument, Nebraska is a few plays away from being in the college football playoff conversation with how they lost to Ohio State, Illinois, and UCLA. Their only blowout loss is to Indiana, while those other 3 games came down to the closing moments. Instead of being ranked in the playoff conversation, they are fighting to become bowl eligible. The same can be said for USC, who beat LSU in week 1 but have lost all 5 games by 8 points or less and 3 games by 4 points or less. They too are fighting for bowl eligibility instead of a college football playoff spot. There's a reason we play games. BYU, on the other hand, has found a way to win in dramatic fashion all season long and is undefeated. Miami has had a few things break their way a few times to keep them alive throughout the season, or they could have 2 or 3 losses right now themselves. Oregon struggled against Idaho and squeaked out a win over Boise State. Texas lost to Georgia at home, but has looked great with a weaker schedule when compared to most. Every team this year feels flawed in some way. It does not matter what your team looks like on paper if you aren't performing in the games. And again, like I said earlier in this video, I think everyone needs to take a step back and take a collective deep breath because I still believe everything will end up working themselves out. Yes, BYU, SMU, and Indiana on paper should not be good, but 2 of those 3 teams were projected to finish towards the bottom of their conference heading into the season, and you will never be able to flip the biased narrative of that. Are their strengths of schedule great? Indiana not so much, but other than the Michigan game, they have dominated everyone, including Nebraska, who Ohio State struggled against. That narrative has been totally forgotten. BYU beat SMU earlier this season. They are playing above what they were expected to do all year long and are just getting lucky. SMU has played extremely well in the ACC in their first year. If all 3 of these teams came into the season ranked in the preseason polls or near the polls, I feel like the narrative would have been a bit different. I think they have been amazing stories to watch so far this season, and if we truly get Alabama traveling to Bloomington, Indiana for a first-round playoff game in December, I think the environment would be electric. I've had so much fun covering college football this year, and I truly believe things will work itself out. There's a lot of negativity around the game right now, but this is a game that needs to be talked about in more of a positive light due to the crazy world we live in nowadays. Football has always been my escape, whether that be playing, watching, or covering the sport, and I believe it is the same for a lot of people who love the game. Everything will work itself out, whether that be the great stories we have seen this year or whether Georgia or other teams get in or not. These rankings right now are just to get headlines and engagement. It has been an amazing season. I truly believe we will have an amazing end to it as well. Now let's just sit back and have fun watching the chaos of college football unfold. But what do you think? How would you grade the selection committee's rankings through its first 2 weeks? Let me know in the comments section below. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to check out one of my other videos YouTube thinks you will love right here. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, remember to embrace the grind.